The rain fell hard over the city of Ahrenfeld, blurring the golden lights of skyscrapers into a watercolor of betrayal. Among those towering structures stood the prestigious Valemore estate, symbol of power, of legacy, of a lie that had ruined Tessa Valemore's life. Once, she had everything. The daughter of Richard and Eloise Valemore, she was born into privilege, groomed to one day take over the Valemore Group, a global empire built on finance, real estate, and philanthropy. Her life had been manicured like the rose gardens that framed their estate, elegant, pristine, and sharp with secrets. On her 21st birthday, Tessa's world crumbled. She had returned early from university, eager to surprise her parents. With the nonprofit proposal, she'd been working on something to bring real change to the company's practices. But when she walked into her father's study, she didn't find admiration. She found horror. Stacks of falsified documents, hidden bank accounts, overseas shell companies. Her family's empire had been built not just on business but on laundering money for criminals, exploiting struggling neighborhoods, and silencing whistleblowers. Worse, she discovered her own name signed on several documents used as a legal shield for her father's crimes without her knowledge. Panicked, she confronted them. "You used me," she said, voice shaking, clutching the documents. "You made me part of this." Richard didn't deny it. Eloise didn't apologize. Instead, they told her the truth. She was never meant to lead. Her role was decorative pretty face for public relations. A puppet they could control. "You want to burn this all down for some moral crusade." Richard spat. "You're naive." She threatened to go to the authorities. That night she was institutionalized. The media was fed a story of emotional breakdown. Stress-induced delusions, they said. A tragic case of inherited mental instability. Friends vanished. Her social accounts were scrubbed. And inside the cold walls of a private facility, Tessa Valemore disappeared. For 3 years, no one visited. No one asked questions. Her parents even announced she'd gone abroad for intensive healing. And in her absence, the Valemore Group thrived. New projects, new awards, a legacy growing stronger, built on the ashes of her silence. But Tessa wasn't broken. She was watching, waiting. With the help of a young nurse named Liam, one of the few who believed her, she escaped, faked a transfer, forged paperwork, vanished off the grid. And with the little cash she smuggled out, she started over under a new name, Tess Arden. In a small apartment above an old bookstore. She rebuilt herself. She studied, quietly gathering everything she needed: evidence, contacts, allies. She used burner phones, encrypted emails, fake names. She tracked the company's illegal activity, identified weak links, and slowly reconnected with the few people who hadn't believed the lies, including a former board member turned whistleblower, who had vanished under similar circumstances now. 5 years since her world was shattered. She stood ready to burn down the kingdom that had crowned her with thorns. Not as Tessa Valemore, but as someone far more dangerous. As the storm outside grew stronger, Tess stared at the glowing monitors in her apartment. On them were the faces of her parents preparing for the annual Valemore Legacy Gala, a media event that would be streamed live, celebrating family values, honoring her as their beloved daughter despite her absence. Her smile was cold. "Let's make it a night to remember," she whispered. The Valemore Legacy Gala was the kind of event that made headlines before it even happened. Red carpets rolled out in front of the Grand Ahrenfeld Conservatory. Strings of gold light shimmered over the entrance like a crown of manufactured royalty. Billionaires, celebrities, and politicians flocked in, all dressed in reverence for the empire Richard and Eloise Valemore built, blissfully ignorant of the blood and betrayal beneath its foundation. Inside, towering glass walls revealed a skyline, trembling with rain. Waiters drifted with champagne flutes, and a classical quartet played softly in the background. But none of it touched Tess Arden as she moved silently through the crowd in a black velvet gown, her face half shadowed by a delicate lace mask. It was a masquerade theme this year, perfect. A cruel joke, really. So many masks. Her own heart beat with a calm she didn't recognize. There was no nervousness, only purpose. No one recognized her, not with her hair dyed jet black, not with her posture sharpened by years of survival. and not without the bright, naive smile of the heiress she used to be. That girl was buried beneath the marble floors of this place. The one who now stood among the elite was something else entirely. She watched her father from across the ballroom, holding court as always. Richard was laughing, hands clasped behind his back like a benevolent king. Her mother, a vision of polished ice, whispered into a senator's ear with an expression that said she already owned his vote. The charade made Tessa's stomach tighten, but she didn't break focus. The night was scripted down to the second. Her allies were already in place. Liam, dressed as a valet, stood near the underground garage entrance, having quietly replaced the real security footage with looped surveillance. Alina, a former assistant who'd been discarded after asking too many questions, now worked the catering team, her earpiece synced with Tessa's burner phone. And Malcolm, the export member who'd been forced into bankruptcy, stood in the shadows with a briefcase full of hard drives. Years of silence, of planning, of pennant, all led to tonight. Tess moved closer to the stage where the speeches would begin. A hush fell over the crowd as Richard took the microphone. Eloise stood at his side, hand on his arm, like they were still the golden couple. "Good evening, friends," Richard said, his voice booming with charm. "Tonight we celebrate legacy, not just what we've built, but who we are." Famalita. Fingers twitched. "I'd like to dedicate this evening to my daughter," he continued, voice thick with mock sincerity. "Though she could not be with us tonight, she is in our hearts always." A soft, polite clap rose from the audience. Tess stepped forward and pressed a button on her small remote. The main screen behind Richard meant to play a tribute video. For a second, then changed. The audio cut out. The lights flickered. The image that appeared on the screen was grainy, unedited, and terrifyingly real. It was Tess Young, confused, in tears, locked inside the Valemore Institute, a hidden recording from the facility Liam had helped her extract. Her voice cracked as she begged the doctors to believe her. "I didn't hallucinate. My father, he used my name to sign illegal contracts. I have the proof, please." The room went dead silent. Richard turned, staring in disbelief as more images flashed. Company spreadsheets with forged signatures, internal emails threatening, whistleblowers' bank transfers to blacklisted accounts. Whispers rose, turning to gasps. Eloise stepped forward. "What is this?" Tess removed her mask and climbed the stage. "This," she said into the microphone, "is the truth you tried to bury." The crowd turned in shock. Richard's face went pale. "Tessa, no," she cut him off. "Not your daughter. Not anymore." Behind her, Malcolm opened the briefcase and connected the hard drives to a local network port. Every file, every document, every hidden deal, the entire rot of Valemore Group began uploading to live servers, mirrored across a dozen news outlets and watchdog sites. Alina and Liam began handing USB sticks to reporters in the audience. Phones lit up, flashbulbs popped. Someone yelled, "Is this real?" Tess faced the audience, her voice steady. "They institutionalized me to protect their empire. They used my name to commit crimes. Tonight, that ends." Security moved in. Richard barked orders. But it was too late. The dam had broken. Cameras rolled, journalists surged forward, and the pristine golden mask of the Valemore shattered. Tess stepped off the stage as her parents stood frozen, their legacy unraveling in front of the world. She didn't look back, because this wasn't just revenge, it was justice. The days that followed the gala were a storm of headlines, lawsuits, and silence. Headlines screamed across news tickers: Valemore, empire implodes after heiress exposes massive fraud. Daughter speaks out after years of silence, and whistleblower returns from the dead. Richard and Eloise vanished from public view. Their attorneys scrambled to control the damage, but there was no stopping the cascade once it had begun. The digital files Tess had released were mirrored across over 24 international servers. Investigative journalists dug deep, uncovering even more layers of corruption, including bribes, land seizures, and political collusion. The scandal didn't just destroy the Valemore name, it scorched anyone remotely tied to them, and through it all, Tess remained quiet. She refused interview requests, didn't post to social media, didn't bask in the victory. Instead, she walked the cracked sidewalks of downtown Ahrenfeld in her borrowed coat. Watching the city she once looked down upon from a penthouse window, now stare back at her with curiosity and awe. People whispered her name in cafes, on buses, at protests. Tessa Valemore is alive, they said. She brought the truth. She didn't want to be a symbol. She just wanted to finish what she'd started. In the quiet corners of the public library, she and Malcolm pieced together the legal network needed to support the fallout. Liam worked with pro bono medical groups to help patients at the same institution where Tess had been imprisoned. Many of them were there unjustly, voices silenced for convenience. Alina, now publicly vindicated, helped former employees file lawsuits for wrongful termination. The reckoning was bigger than she'd imagined, and so was the price. One afternoon, Tess stood outside the courthouse as Richard Valemore stepped from a black SUV in handcuffs. The cameras flared. Protesters shouted. His jaw clenched, but he looked smaller now, his tailored suit limp. The arrogance stripped away. Their eyes met. He didn't look at her with hate. He looked at her like a man who finally realized his daughter wasn't his possession. That night she returned to her tiny apartment to find a letter slipped beneath her door. The envelope was ivory, heavy. She recognized the handwriting instantly. Her mother's. Inside it said only, "You were never meant to win, but you did. You are your father's daughter, whether you want to be or not. Be careful what you build from the ashes." There was no apology, only bitterness. Tess folded the letter slowly, placed it in a fireproof box, and locked it away. She didn't need their words anymore. As lawsuits mounted, assets were frozen. The Valemore estate was seized by federal agents. Charities began returning donations. Politicians scrambled to distance themselves. The family brand became a curse. And yet, not everyone was angry. Strangers began to approach her quietly, respectfully. Survivors of similar betrayals. Former Valemore employees. People who had once been silenced by fear but now stood a little taller, knowing someone had broken through. In the middle of it all, Tess received an unexpected invitation from the Ahrenfeld Truth Commission. They were forming a civilian advisory council to oversee corporate transparency reforms. They wanted her on the board. She hesitated. "I'm not a leader," she told Liam. "I didn't do this for a title." "No," he said. "You did it because someone had to. And now, people trust you." That night, she stood by her window as the rain returned, soft this time, gentle. She remembered that night years ago, walking into her father's study, thinking she could change things with words. Now she knew better. Change didn't come by asking. It came by burning down the lie and planting something in the soil. She accepted the invitation, not as a Valemore, but as a woman who had buried that name and risen from its grave. Tess walked through the remnants of the old Valemore estate under a dull gray sky. The once manicured grounds were overgrown, the hedges wild, the roses withered. The house itself, grand and stone-faced, stood silent like a mausoleum. The government had seized it months ago. Its walls no longer whispered power. They groaned under the weight of scandal. She wasn't here for closure. She was here to reclaim the truth. Beneath the East Wing's marble floor was a private archive one Richard had kept off every record. She'd discovered its existence only recently through a trail of emails Liam had decrypted. Hidden files, photo negatives, and handwritten ledgers had been stored there, proof of decades of backroom deals, payoffs, and personal secrets that even Tess hadn't imagined. Inside the dust-covered archive room, Tess found the truth wasn't just in the numbers. There were letters, hundreds of them. Some addressed to Eloise from influential men, offering illicit favors. Others were from whistleblowers, silenced through coercion. But one box stopped, her breath cold. From Eloise to Tessa, not sent. She opened it with trembling hands. Inside were letters dated during the years Tess had been institutionalized. Letters her mother had written but never mailed. They weren't apologies. Eloise Valemore didn't believe in remorse. But there was something else there. Guilt, maybe, or fear. "I watched your light dim as a child," one letter read. "And I feared what would happen if you ever realized your strength." Another. "You are not weak, Tessa. That is why your father feared you, and why I kept you away." And the last, undated. "I could have stopped him, but I didn't. Because I was too afraid of losing everything we built. Now, we've lost it anyway. Tess sat on the floor, letters around her like ash. Even now, her mother refused to say sorry. But these letters, they were the cracks in the marble, the pieces of a woman who'd buried her soul beneath ambition. And they were proof that Tess had never been crazy. She'd been silenced. Yes, betrayed. But never wrong. She took only one letter with her, the final one. A reminder that silence was a choice. And hers had ended the moment she chose truth. That same week, Tess appeared before the Truth Commission. In a modest blazer and slacks, her hair tied back, face free of makeup or masks. The hall was filled with people, students, workers, former Valemore staff. She didn't speak with vengeance. She spoke with clarity. We must stop treating corruption like an infection that spreads, she said. It's not something we catch, it's something we build, stone by stone, when we choose comfort over courage. The room was silent, then thundered with applause. Her speech went viral. Headlines called her the heiress who uncrowned herself. She became a symbol not of revenge, but of rebirth. And with that came the question, what next? She declined book deals. She rejected political invitations. She didn't want to be a celebrity of ruin. Instead, she focused on something real. She took the compensation the state offered her money recovered from Valamore's frozen accounts and purchased a half-burned community library in a poor district her family had once tried to gentrify. There, she announced the formation of the Arden Institute, a space for free legal aid, whistleblower protection, mental health services, and reform education, named not after her old life, but the one she built with her own hands. Volunteers came. Donors followed, and slowly the walls began to rise. One day, as she stood with a group of volunteers laying the first bricks, a little girl ran up to her, eyes wide. Are you the lady who saved the city? Tess smiled. No, she said. But I helped tear down the thing that was hurting it. The girl nodded like that made perfect sense and skipped away. That night, Tess stood alone in the shell of the building under construction, looking out at the city's skyline. For the first time in years, she felt peace. Not the fragile kind money bought, but the quiet certainty of someone who knew who she was and what she had survived. The grand opening of the Arden Institute arrived with little fanfare. Tess had deliberately avoided press releases and media spotlights. This wasn't about spectacle, it was about permanence. The building stood where the old public library once leaned in disrepaired, now transformed into a clean, modern space with open classrooms, quiet offices, and a central courtyard filled with native trees and benches. The walls were painted in soft earth tones, and the logo, a phoenix carved from interlocking hands, glowed softly above the entrance. Inside, volunteers welcomed the first visitors, a young whistleblower seeking legal help, a mother looking for counseling, and an elderly man clutching a worn eviction notice. These were the people Tess had once been told were obstacles. Now, they were the reason she had rebuilt. Liam stood beside her in the doorway, watching it all unfold. He hadn't just helped her escape that institution years ago. He had helped her stay grounded in the fight that followed. And though there were no romantic words between them, the silence they shared was full of something deeper: respect, survival, and truth. You really did it, he said. No, Tess replied. We did, he nodded, eyes warm. Your mother would have never believed this. Tess looked out across the courtyard, past the walls of the institute to the city beyond. She never believed in anything that didn't come with a brand. Long pause passed between them. Then Liam asked, have you thought about going back to your real name? Tess considered it. For years, Tessa Valemore had been a ghost, either worshipped falsely or vilified unjustly. She had buried that name beneath a mountain of lies, burned its legacy down, and walked away from its crown. But something inside her had changed. Later that evening, after everyone had gone, she walked alone to the front of the building and reached into her bag. She pulled out a small bronze plaque. With careful hands, she mounted it beneath the main sign. It read, The Eloise Gray Center for Memory and Justice, in honor of those silenced by fear, and those who broke the silence. It was the name her mother had once used in private letters, Gray, her maiden name, a name she had hidden, just like her conscience. Tess had chosen to honor it, not to forgive her, but to acknowledge that even those who fall can leave behind something that grows. She stepped back, looking at the way the light hit the plaque. It didn't erase what her mother had done, but it reclaimed what her mother had buried. In the weeks that followed, the institute became a sanctuary. Survivors of corporate abuse, corrupt institutions, and political silencing found their voices within its walls. Tess never needed to be at the front of the room. She trained others, empowered them, stayed present but quiet. She had already taken her spotlight, now she offered it to others. One afternoon she received a letter, this time from a young woman who had been committed to the same facility where Tess once was. They told me I was broken, but your story reminded me I'm not. Thank you for surviving, for people like me who still need to. Tess folded the letter and placed it in a drawer beside the last one her mother had ever written. Later that evening, she stood on the rooftop of the center, watching the sunset turn the city gold. Below, people came and went, some smiling, some quiet, all of them walking into a place that promised help, not harm. She closed her eyes and inhaled deeply. For so long, her life had been about surviving, fighting, burning it all down. But now she was building. And the crown she wore wasn't gold or passed down by blood. It was invisible, earned and unshakable. A crown of truth, a crown of flame reborn, a crown that could never again be shattered.